Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's Daf, Be'ah Lamed Ches. We begin 7 lines from the top of the Amud. Says the Gemara, Omar Shmuel, Sher Shel Patam, an ox belonging to a animal fattener, an animal breeder. Now that animal is intended for whomever will show up on Yom Tov and purchase it. Harehu kiragli kol adam. Which tchum is that shor bound by? Anybody who comes along and purchases that shor, because this fellow, the patam, had everybody in mind. So although we learned yesterday that one's animal assumes his own personal tchum, typically a person can walk 2,000 amma in either direction on Shabbos or Yom Tov, unless he has an Erev tchumen, which allows him to extend his boundary in one direction over the other. For instance, if he placed an Erev 2,000 amma from the city going north, that becomes his Makim Shvisa, his place of residence, which allows him to walk 2,000 amma in either direction from that Erev. Now the shor belonging to the patam typically would assume the tchum, the boundary of its owner. But since he has a wide customer base who he intends to sell his animals to, initially that's what he had in mind. I'm not committing these animals to my tchum, rather I'm allowing them to assume the boundary of its customer, the boundary of the fellow who will come along on Yom Tov and purchase this animal. Now, even though this customer happens to hail from a different city, it doesn't matter. The animal will assume that person's tchum. It's as though it's a pending ownership. The animal is awaiting acquisition by that specific owner and assumes the tchum of that owner. Now the Mefarshim ask, Shmuel himself yesterday tells us, Ein Breira. We can't say, well, now on Yom Tov it has been determined this was my portion all along and it assumed my tchum during Ben Hashmashis. We don't say that. We don't know if this was meant for you. We don't say breira. So why is it when it comes to the shor shel patam, the shor assumes the tchum of the customer, of the fellow who came along today and purchased it? Some persons say a shor shel patam is so different because it's a pending ownership. The fellow who raises these animals allows it to remain hovering, so to speak, and await and wait for the owner to come, to the customer to come, and it will assume that tchum. So it's like a hefker, it's like an ownerless object, which is awaiting acquisition. And therefore, even Shmuel would agree in this case, even without the concept of breira. Breira means there was a joint entity, has to be divided. Let's assume each fellow received his respective portion destined for him initially. That's breira, that's a chiddush. Who says we can say that? Who says it was meant for you? But in this case, where it was sort of ownerless, it was almost like hefker. So now, it's pending. It's awaiting acquisition. And this fellow comes along in Yom Tov and purchases this shor, it was meant for him. And therefore it assumes his tchum. So again, Amar Shmuel, shor shel patam, harehu karagli kol adam. It assumes the tchum of anybody who purchases it, even if it's from a different city. Shel sharoyeh, however, a shor belonging to the local shepherd, this town's, this community's shepherd, who sometimes will sell an animal or two to his local customers. Harehu karagli oisa ha'ir. The animal will assume the tchum of the community member coming from this city. Rashi explains, he doesn't have such a wide customer base. He's not expecting strangers to come along and purchase his animals. It's meant for the local community, for local customers, and therefore, if one of the local members purchases his animal, the animal assumes his personal tchum, but that's it. This doesn't apply to somebody coming from a different town. Let's go down to Rashi at the wide lines. So it's the line right above the wide lines. Shor shel patam. Shemefatim shvorim limkar. He fattens, he feeds animals in anticipation of selling them. Hareyu karagli kol adam afilu benir acher shebala kana de erev. Even if fellow from another town comes along and arrives in town on Yom Tov by way of the Erev that he established to allow him to arrive at this city, he can purchase the animal, take it all the way back to his town, which is really out of bounds as far as the members of this town are concerned. But he can take the animal to where he can go. The kiven de urchel is buni, because since it's the derech, it's customary for this patam to sell his animals to whoever happens to show up. Me esmol ukme b'shusei, demanda asel l'macher v'zavenlei. The thinking is that starting from yesterday, coming into Yom Tov, this is what he had in mind. I'm allowing anybody to come purchase it, and I'm allowing the animal to assume the tchum of that purchaser. This is by the Sheshel Patam, who has a wide customer base. He has an international clientele. But the Sheshel Roya, the Roya is a local fellow, Adam Shemegal Behema Shaloi, Upamim Shemoichem Mehen L'Shchenev L'Makirav. He's a small-time merchant. Sometimes he'll sell one or two to his friends, his neighbors. So then the animal will assume the tchum of its purchaser, but provided he's a local fellow. Alpayim amal chol ruach. Va'afilu irei v'roye zeh dalid alafim amma l'ruach achas. So the chiddush is that even though the shepherd himself presented an erev for himself, which allowed him to walk 4,000 in one direction, he can't hold back his customer from taking the animal to the other side of the city. So this animal assumes the city's territory. Because from before Yom Tov, he had allowed it to relate to the rishus, to the possession, to the boundary, to the territory of the local fellows of the city. Because they're accustomed to purchasing from him. But it can't relate to the tchum of people coming from other cities. He doesn't have this international fame like the animal merchant we mentioned earlier, like the patam fellow, who's well known in the entire area, who has customers coming from all over. This fellow is a local fellow, and therefore his animals are limited and must remain within the city's territory. It's mashma from Rashi that it must remain within the standard city's territory, which is 2,000 in either direction. Okay, so Shmuel tells us two halachos, very similar. When it's a shur slated for sale to a large crowd, then it assumes the tchum of anybody that comes to purchase that animal. As opposed to a small-time merchant, a roya, it follows the tchum of that city. And the chiddush is that even if he himself made his own erev to allow him 4,000 amma in one direction, his animal is not bound by that erev. If he sells it to somebody local, that fellow can take it throughout the tchum of the city, which is 2,000 amma in either direction. Continues the Gemara. Hashoyel kli mechaver me'erev Yom Tov. Somebody borrows a kli from his friend before Yom Tov. Whose tchum is that kli going to attach to? It's bound by the tchum of the borrower, because it's serving him, it's in his possession, and it assumes his tchum. Pshita, of course. Well, if he assumed responsibility for the kli, of course it's bound by his tchum. If this happened before Yom Tov, then coming into Yom Tov, his tchum became attached to this item. Apparently we're speaking that although he asked to borrow it before Yom Tov, but actual delivery only took place on Yom Tov. That's the chiddush. That since I asked for it before Yom Tov, the kli assumes my tchum, even though I only actually received it on Yom Tov. Ma'od, perhaps I would think, La b'rsusei ukmei. The owner hadn't really placed it in my possession, because I hadn't actually gotten it until Yom Tov. So let's assume the Kli is bound by the Tchum of its owner, not the borrower. K'mashman, the Chiddush is, no. Since he knows it's going to end up by the borrower, he plans on giving it to him. It's meant to service him on Yom Tov. It assumes the boundary of the shayel, of the borrower. This is the right to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda, Hashayel Kli Mechaver Me'erev Yom Tov. If Reuven borrows a Kli from his friend, from Shimon, before Yom Tov, although in actuality it was only delivered to him on Yom Tov, it assumes the tchum of the borrower, even though he did not have physical possession until Yom Tov. But since coming into Yom Tov it was slated for delivery to this fellow, it was meant to be used by this fellow on Yom Tov, it assumes the tchum, the boundary of the borrower. The Mishnah continued, however, if he only borrowed it on Yom Tov, it's too late. Which tchum is this kli bound by? The boundary of its owner. Pshita, of course. If I only got it on Yom Tov, then why would it get my tchum? Tchum is established by Ben Hashmashes, of course. At which point it was sitting in the hands of its owner, not my hands. So what's the chiddush of the Mishnah? That it remains in the tchum of its owner. Apparently we're speaking about the following case. The Ragel v'shoyel minei. Reuven is accustomed to borrowing this kli from Shimon. Every Yom Tov he comes and borrows a knife. So perhaps I would say, well, it was meant for him. Perhaps I would think that the owner already knows it's going to end up in Reuven's hands, and he allowed it to assume the tchum of Reuven. Kamashma, the chiddush is no. Because he's thinking to himself, you know what, maybe this Yom Tov is different. Perhaps Reuven will find another fellow to borrow from. He'll borrow from him. So, the fact that he didn't come to me Erev Yom Tov perhaps is an indication that he found another fellow to lend him the kli, and therefore I did not place it into his rishus. I did not have das that this kli should assume the tchum of the borrower. So again, the Mishnah speaks about a case where he borrowed it on Yom Tov. We say the kli is bound by the tchum of the owner, although he's accustomed to borrowing from him every Yom Tov. That doesn't necessarily commit the kli to the borrower's tchum. The Mishnah continued, if Rachel borrows from Leah some ingredients for her dish, for her dough, Mishnah spoke about tavlin, seasoning, umayim, water, umelach, or salt. Rashi says the tavlin was for the kedera, for a dish. Umayim and melach was for the isa, for the dough. What does Mishnah say? This joint entity, this dish, this dough is bound by the tchum of both nashim, Rachel and Leah, because we have elements within this dough that belong to Rachel. It was her flour, and it belongs to Leah as well. It was her salt and water. So this isa, this dough, must remain in an area which can be commonly accessed by both nashim, Rachel and Leah, equally. Rachel can't take it to her tchum, nor can Leah take it to her tchum, because it has ingredients owned by both individuals. Asks the Gemara kasha. We'll get to that in a minute. Ki solak Rabbi Abba. When Rabbi Abba came to Eretz Yisrael, Omar, he said, Yehi Rava, it should be the Ratzon Hashem, that my ascent to Eretz Yisrael should be successful. De'ema milsa, I should be zeicha to say words of Torah, to skabel, that it should be well received by the people in Eretz Yisrael. Ki salak, when he climbed, when he arrived in Eretz Yisrael, he encountered the following group of Chachamim having a discussion and discussing our mission. Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Papi, Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Amalei, some say with other people, Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Shimon Pazi, Rabbi Sagnavch. So you met this group of Chachamim, and they were sitting and challenging, asking on the Mishnah. Mishnah says, we have a dough containing ingredients from Rachel, ingredients belonging to Leah. This dough is now bound by both territories, both tchumen. Amai, why do we say that? V'livtil ma'im u'melech l'gabe isa. Look, we have a dough. Who's the owner of the dough? Rachel. She made the dough. So the dough is attributed to Rachel. Although there are some ingredients in there that were taken from Leah and that were present in Leah's possession during Ben Hashmashis and assume the boundary of Leah. But once it's been incorporated into Rachel's dough, it's considered Rachel's. She's the Baal of that dough. So why does she have to reckon with the Mayim and the Melach that she borrowed from Leah? It should be bottled to the Isa. And Tosfos explains, this isn't necessarily the common concept of bittul. Here it's more than that. When it comes to Tchumen, we look at ownership. We look at who is the Baal of this entity. Who is it serving? Now, although we have some ingredients within this dough that belong to Leah, or that were taken from Leah during Yom Tov, but it's a dough, it's a bread. The bread is owned by Rachel. We look at the entirety of this entity. We don't look at the sum total of the individual ingredients contained in this dough and this bread. Tchumen, Shvisa, relates to the entity. The entity belongs to Rachel. Whose bread is it? It's Rachel's bread. Yeah, the water, the salt within it belongs to Leah, or taken from Leah, but the bread, as a bread, belongs to Rachel. So it should be bound by Rachel's tchum. We could ignore Leah. Amai, what's the problem? V'lebatel, ma'im u'melach gabe isa. The water and salt should be bottled to the dough. The bread belongs to Rachel, and it assumes her tchum. That was the kasha presented by these chachamim. And Rabbi Abba, who was a newcomer, overheard this kasha, and he wanted to respond and give a teretz. Amalu Rabbi Abba, how could you suggest that Leah's ingredients should be bottled to Rachel's bread? It's not a question of something which is usr, that's bottled to something which is heter. He's speaking about monetary ownership. It belongs to Leah. When it comes to ownership, when it comes to financial interest, bittul can apply? Of course not. Listen to this. Harishan is Arav loy kav chitin. Suppose Ruvain's kav, measure of chitin, got mixed into ba'asora kabin chitin shel chaveira, to 10 kabin of his friend's wheat. So Ruvain's kav got mixed into Shimon's 10. Yechal alav achadi? Can you entertain? Can you even think to say that Shimon can now eat the entire supply of 11 kav? Reuven is his bottle, doesn't owe him a penny. He'll eat it v'chadi, with full of glee. Oh, he just got another kav for free? Of course not. It belongs to Reuven. It doesn't become bottle as per ownership. Says Rashi on top, v'chadi v'yismach. He'll have the extra kav happily. V'yismach b'davar shloi omaboy. Here he got a free kav without any toil, without any effort. Of course not. Kachsu, the same thing by the dough. Ein shma bottom mekan. Leah's ingredients don't become hefker, don't become bottled to Rachel. She doesn't lose her ownership. Since the mayim when Leah's possession during Ben Hashmashos and was kind of shvisa then, how could she give that up? How could you have her lose that ownership? Now, Dolly Kashilan, there was never a kasha mishum shilosan la, oinos matana ye mutter. The fact that she gave it away to Rachel, it's like borrowing, like gifting, and it assumes the tchum of the recipient. That wasn't the kasha. The Amar b'Yom haragla mashal. Because a minute ago we said that if you only receive it on Yom Tov, it assumes the tchum of the owner, the one who lent it. The basa ben hashmasha says lina, because ben hashmasha is determines the tchum. In this case, when she only received it on Yom Tov, of course, that concept wouldn't apply, because during Ben Hashmashis, it was still in the hands and the possessions of Leah. So that wasn't a question that the fact that I borrowed it, it should assume my tchum, because I only borrowed on Yom Tov, too late. What then was the kasha? Because of bittul. Look at the totality of this entity. Most of it is Rachel's. A mir is Leah. A little salt, a little water. That should be bottled to Rachel's. What do you mean? Balus? Ownership, financial interest is not bottle. Now, Taisus makes an interesting point. Taisus says that the truth is we're speaking about tchumen, which is really isur v'heter related. You are limited, you are bound, you are restricted to certain tchumen. So l'chayra, bittul can apply, just as it applies to all types of isurim v'heter. So Taisus answers, you're right. It does express itself in isur tchumen, but it's based on ownership. Isur tchumen is different than other types of isurim. The concept of a tchum limitation is based on ownership. It's limited, it's bound by the tchum of its owner. So over here you can't just focus on the isur aspect. If the isur is rooted in ownership, well, if ownership can't be bottled, then by extension, the isur tchumen will be intact as well. You can't just nullify it. So that was his response. What do you mean to ask? Bittul? Why does the Mishnah say you have to reckon with Leah's ingredients? Bittul. Bittul works by isur. Here it's ownership. It's balus that creates the isur tchumen. Balus is never bottled. Ownership is not nullified. Achichu oleh, says the Gemara. So they began laughing at him. They didn't like his analogy. From the chitim with the kav. Amalu, he responded, you're laughing at me. Shakli. I'm going to take away your chashav looking robe. You're not deserving of that robe. They laughed even further. Amar v'Oishia, you know what? Shaper of it. It's actually correct. They laughed at him, meaning they had good reason to question his analogy. Why? If you take a close look at his own wording, this analogy of the kav that got mixed in 10, the wording itself seems questionable. Why? Why did he pick an example of chitim getting mixed into chitim, which is the same kind, min b'minay, rather than speaking about one type mixing into another type, chitim into se'ir? Why not? Why did he stick to the same type? Why didn't he present a case of chitim getting mixed into se'ir to prove his point? Because in that case, of course, it's bottle. Because it's one type getting mixed into another type. Bottle. And even he would agree that if Ruvain's chitim gets mixed into Shimon's so'irim, it's min b'she'eni mina. It's one type into a different type. Creates that contrast. And one overrides the other and it's mevatlet. And he would lose his ownership. He would lose any rights. Even Rabbi Vo would agree to that. Right? That's why he didn't mention chitim and so'irim. Rather, Rabbi Abba only mentioned chitim b'chitim, because chitim and so'irim, even he would agree, is batal, and he loses his rights. If that's the case. So why then did he mention chitim and chitim? Why would that be any different? I understand chitim and chitim are the same type. That doesn't prevent bittul according to the Chachamim. It is a shittas of Rabbi Yehuda. It says that when it's the same min mixing in to each other, it's not batal. We don't have that contrast. We don't have the challenge to create the bittul. But according to Chacham, there's nothing to prevent bittul even when it's min b'mina. Chitin b'chitin nami. So even if it's a kav chitin of Reuven getting mixed into 10 kabin of chitin of Shimon, even there, nihid Rabbi Yehuda like batal. I understand according to Rabbi Yehuda, min b'she'eni min is not batal. He learns from a pasuk. We have the halacha by Yom Kippur where we mix the dama par and the dama soir. We apply it to the mizbeach. Rabbi Yehuda brings a right from there that when two of the same type get mixed in, there's no bittul. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda's shita, Chacham learned it's because mitzvahs are not mevatel each other. I understand Rabbi Yehuda holds min b'midah is not batal. But l'Rabbanan mivtal batal, according to Rabbanan, even when it's min b'midah, there's nothing to hold back bittul from taking place. So I understand why they laughed, because you're using an analogy which was really self-contradictory. You're trying to make a point. But in your point, you indicated that even when it comes to ownership, there is an option of bittul. If it's min b'she'eni mina, if it's his chitim mixing with his sa'ir, it's batal. And that's why you were careful to present it in a manner of chitim b'chitim, because that's min b'mina. And you held, well, that proves my point, that ownership is not batal. The difference between min b'she'eni mina and min b'mina only holds true according to Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabban, even if it's min b'mina, it's really batal. So if you agree that even ownership can be batal if it's min b'shein minai, well, guess what? According to the Chacham, even if it's min b'mina, it's batal. So you didn't really make a point at all. You were trying to prove that ownership is not batal, but your own wording indicated otherwise. So you have to understand what the back and forth was. The Shita B'Kabetzes has a whole explanation to explain what Rabbi Abba was thinking. But in any case, this was Rabbi Oishia's response. And he pretty much was supporting the Chachamim, who questioned the Mishnah, who challenged the halacha in the Mishnah, which says that a jointly owned dough is bound by both boundaries, both tchumen. And they asked, what do you mean? This negligible ingredient, a little salt, a little water, is batal, is overtaken by the dough, by the flour, which is the main ingredient, which belongs to Rachel. Amalei Rav Safra. Rav Safra was backing Rav Abba. And he went and he challenged Rav Oishia. Moshe. This was a respectful term. Moshe. Shapeka Amris. You're like Moshe Rabbeinu in my eyes. You're the Talmud Chacham in this door. Fine, but Shapeka Amris? Is what you're saying true? Does it make sense? So you mean to say that Leah's ingredients can become batal of Rachel's bread, despite the fact that she owns those ingredients? Ownership can be batal? Those chachamim who asked this kasha, that say it should be batal and shouldn't be bound by the tchum of Leah, rather it assumes the tchum of Rachel. They didn't hear the halacha presented by Reb Chia Katusfa, Mishmei the Rav, the name of Rav, who said as follows. The Gemara is going to make an interesting comparison, and we'll try to bring out a point here that Leah's ingredients cannot be batal in Rachel's loaf of bread because she retains ownership. She retains a claim to those ingredients, and therefore it's considered hers and bound by her tchum. What was the halacha? If a person picks out some pebbles from his friend's silo, his friend's pile of grain, chayiv l'shalom, he has to pay. You know how much? Chayiv l'shalom l'dmei chitim, as though these pebbles were worth like chitim, as though he took out some wheat. So what's the background of this halacha? You see, when you have a silo, a granary, it's understood there's going to be some pebbles mixed in, and you can sell it in its entirety as though it's all completely grain. You don't have to reckon with the pebbles. It's understood. The customer knows. He's fully aware of the fact that inevitably there's going to be some grain, some pebbles in your grain. That's fine. And he pays for it as though it's chit. That's provided that it's there naturally. But if he removes the pebbles, too late. He can no longer put them back, because now he's stealing. He's filling up his granary with pebbles. So if they're there originally, fine, you can leave them there and charge as though they're chitim. But if he removes the pebbles, then he cannot restore that. He can't put it back. So if Reuven goes over to the Gerin of Shimon and pulls out the pebbles, he caused them a loss. Now he can no longer charge for those pebbles as though they're grains, kernels of wheat. He's chayiv l'shalom lo dmei chitim. He has to pay back for those pebbles as though they're chitim. He caused them that loss. Now the Rashbam Bava Basra explains, this isn't just a grama. It's garmi. It's a more direct cause of loss. He did a masa. He removed the pebbles. By doing so, he brought about a loss. It's like destroying somebody's document, being soirev shtaroisev shel chaveroi, burning his fellow's shtar chayiv. What did I do? I didn't steal anything. I just stole your document. You did it through a masa, which that masa brought about a loss. That's called garmi and is chayiv. It's different than grama, where it's just a causing something to happen. Here he did an actual masa, which brought about a loss. So this is the halacha in the name of Rav. If he's boired tzroiros, he's chayiv to pay as though those pebbles were kernels of wheat. Oh, Alma, what do we see from here? Kilo chasrei. He diminished this measurement of kernels. We look at it as though he lost. He made him lose this much chitim. Even though you may argue and say, what do you mean? Pebbles are worthless. What do I do? The fact is, he brought about a loss. He was memait this much chitim. Hachanami kila chasrei. Over here as well. You may argue and say, well, a little water, a little salt, a bottle to the dough. Right? So they don't have significance. They're negligible. They've been overtaken by that dough which belongs to Rachel. I should assume the tchum of Rachel. You're right, you have a good point there. But the fact is, Leah, the owner of that water and salt, has a claim on Rachel. You have to give me back the salt and water that you borrowed from me. She's going to have to pay her back what she borrowed. So of course she's not asking it back today, but tomorrow, the next day, she's going to have it back. So we apply this concept of kilo chasrei. It's just a borrowed term here. You've diminished this measure, which means there's a portion of this dough that belongs to Leah. It's committed to Leah. It's bound to Leah. Because she has to compensate her for those ingredients. So although the truth is that as far as the actual substance itself, you don't see it. It's part of the dough. It's been absorbed, incorporated, and embedded in the dough. So it should be bottled. And should assume the tchum of Rachel, the borrower. That's true, it's a good point. But since Leah still has a personal claim on Rachel, you have to pay me back for those ingredients. That personal claim gives chashivas, adds significance to those ingredients. You can't just say they're obsolete, they don't exist. When you look at them, they don't exist. Where are they? But since there's a personal claim on the borrower on account of these ingredients, which she borrowed and she has to return, that gives chashivas. That gives importance to those ingredients wherever they are. We have to reckon with them. Interesting svara. The personal claim, the personal commitment to return, to compensate for those ingredients, can't allow you to ignore the ingredients. They now have chashivas, and they can't be bottled. And that's why the Mishnah tells us that this Isa, this dough, is bound by both boundaries. The tchum of Rachel, the owner of the bread, tchum of Leah, the owner of these ingredients. Amali Abai, so Abai responded. He held that the kasha was a good kasha on the Mishnah. It should be bottled. How? He says like this. The fact is, Leah has no interest in retrieving those ingredients today. She lent them today. Go ahead, gesund ahead, use it for Yom Tov. So as far as today is concerned, she has no claim. Her claim is sort of suspended until tomorrow, the next day, when she has a chance, she'll give it back to me. She'll repay me for those ingredients. But for the time being, her claim is rested. There's no active claim today. And as such, says Abaye, that should allow the ingredients to be bottled. It's the claim that's giving it chashivas. But there is no claim today. I understand she'll have to repair. I understand the actual ownership is not bottled. I'm not giving up those ingredients. You have to pay back. But for the time being, she's allowing Rachel to use it without returning it. So as far as Yom Tov is concerned, and as far as Shvisa of Yom Tov is concerned, as far as Tchum is concerned, right now there is no claim on those ingredients. There's nothing to prevent it from assuming the Tchum of Rachel, from becoming bottled to her bread and acquiring the boundary of Rachel. Only Abai responds, Mar, master, meaning you don't differentiate between one case and the other. Between money that has a claimant, such as the fellow who took the tzreiros out of the Gurin. Well, he has a claim right there. Pay back your damage. As opposed to ingredients borrowed for her dough. She's not coming after her on Yom Tov. So today, for the time being, there's no claimant here. It's money without a claimant, without a tviyah. And therefore, there's nothing holding it back from being bottled to my loaf of bread. So that was Abai's argument. There's a difference between when there's a claim, an active claim, or an inactive claim, such as in the case of the Mayim Melach mixed into the Isa, and therefore it should be bottled. And what's the pshat in the Mishnah? Amalei. So Rav Safra responded to Abaye. You're differentiating between one case and the other. I'll prove to you that there's no room for chiluk. Well, let's think about it. According to what you're saying, that depends whether or not there's a claim on this item. How are you going to understand the following halacha? A classic example of an isser which is batal beheter. Does it make a difference whether the isser is owned by somebody, claimed by somebody or not? Of course not. We never find anywhere in the Torah that isser can't be batal beheter if the isser belongs to somebody and he claims it. It doesn't work like that. So when it comes to bittul isser beheter, it's irrelevant of whether somebody's claiming it or not claiming it, whether it's owned or ownerless. Isser is batal beheter, period. Because isser can be batal beheter. We ignore ownership and claims. It's the isser element that it's going to be batal. And therefore, when it comes to isser, it's batal. But when it comes to our sugya, where the focal point is ba'alos, who does it belong to? As Tosfos explains for us so eloquently. Even though we have two elements, we have ba'alos and isser tchumen, but the isser tchumen is fully dependent and a product of ownership. When we speak about ownership can't be batal. That's going to be the crux of his response. According to you, how do you explain Rav Chizda's halach? So he's going to follow Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, which we briefly mentioned earlier, who holds that bittul only works when there are two different types, min b'she'ein minay. But if it's the same type of thing, it's not batal. There isn't that contrast and that challenge, and one doesn't overtake the other. They both stay firmly in place. They're not affected by each other. That's Rabbi Yehuda's shita. He's going to expound on that. Nevela betela b'shchuta. You have a piece of a nevela, which is aser, falling into 10 pieces of kosher meat, shchuta meat. We say the nevela is bata and becomes mutter. Why? Because they're two different types. Now, as Rashi points out, how do you determine whether it's the same or different? You focus on the roif, on the recipient of that isser. So the nevela that falls into shchuta, we focus on the shchuta. Is the shchuta similar to the isser? Is the recipient of the isser, in this case the shchuta, in any way similar to the nevela that fell into it? If it is, then it's called min b'minay and it can't be batal. However, if there's no common denominator between the shchuta and the nevela, then we say it's min b'she'ein minay, and the nevela is batal b'roif. So nevela that falls into shchuta, it's betela b'shchuta. It becomes mutter. Because if you focus on the shchuta, we see a clear difference between himself and the nevela. They have nothing in common. It's impossible for the shchuta, which is basar kosher, to turn into isser, like the nevela. So that sets him apart from the nevela. It's called min b'she'ein minay. And the isser is batal beheter. However, if you have a shchuta that falls into nevela, shchuta ain't a betel b'nevela. We don't say that the one piece of shchuta that falls into the 10 pieces of nevela becomes like the nevela, and Rashi explains that if somebody touches the meat, it becomes tameh. You don't say that. Why? Because we focus on the recipient. In this case, it's the nevela, 10 pieces of nevela. And we say, well, can you become like the shchuta that fell onto you? Do you have something in common? No. It is. In this case, it is. Lefisha efshar. The nevela shati asa shchuta, because the nevela, which is now aser and tameh, can turn into a shchuta. What does this mean? It's just a way of saying that if the nevela spoils, it becomes inedible, unfit for achila, then it's mutter. So in a way, the nevela can sort of turn into a shchuta, can assume the status of shchuta, become heter. And when we focus on the nevela, which is the recipient of the item that fell into it, right? The shchuta fell into the nevela is the recipient. And if there's any way the nevela can find common ground with the shchuta, such as if it spoils, and and then it becomes mutter, the nevel can become a shchuta in that way. And we treat them like they're same min, same type. Min b'mina, it's not batal. Okay, so that's the concept of bitul b'roiv. According to Rabbi Yehuda, min b'mina is not batal. How do we focus? How do we determine? How do we categorize the status of these things? We focus on the roiv, and the question is whether it can turn into the miyut. Okay. In any case, are you going to say that bittul of isra v'heta is totally depends on ownership? Hachanam, here's what you're going to say: Dichiyis le'bailam le'batla. Right, the nevel is batal b'shchuta. Let's say the nevel is owned by Reuven, and the shchuta is owned by Shimon. Is le'balam. It's not going to be batal because it's owned by somebody, and Bala's ownership, financial interest can't be batal. Is that true? So only if it's ownerless, if it's hefker, it's batal. But if it's owned by somebody, it can't be batal because he has a claim on it. That's not true. Because if that were true, then even if it's hefker, he would have the same concern. Because even something which is really ownerless has chashivas as though it's owned. It has value. And if value prevents bittul, because this value can be batal on the other value, can't lose its value by mixing it. If that's true, then even hefker wouldn't have bittul. Then you wouldn't have bittul anywhere in the Torah. So you might say, yeah, true. Issa could only be batal if it's ownerless, if it's hefker. In which case it doesn't have value. Is that true? But it's not true. Vatanya. Listen to this Beitzah. It's actually a Mishnah, an Erevin. We're now going to compare to entirely different halacha, but we're going to draw a comparison. Take out an akuda, take out an element of that halacha and prove our point. We know that a person's possessions, his behema, his kalim, assume his own tchum. They're bound by the boundary of its owner, as we learned throughout the sugi. What about if it's hefker? Whose tchum does it get? According to Rabbi Nuri, even a chefza hefker is kind of shvisa. So during Ben Hashmashos, it assumes a tchum of 2,000 either direction and must be kept within that boundary throughout Shabbos. What do you mean? It has no owner. How does it get a tchum? Even though there is no balam owning this chayfetz, we treat it as though there is an owner there involved in the picture. No Farshim say because the chayfetz of hefker is slated to be picked up by somebody, is meant to serve somebody. As we see here, he picked it up. So it was meant for him. And therefore we treat it as though it has value, it has ownership, and is attributed to a person and to an owner, therefore it gets the tchum of an owner. And therefore it has tchum. Which tchum? Its own tchum. Its own 2,000 amma, which is determined based on its whereabouts, on its location Ben Hashmashos. So you see that even a chayfetz of hefker is treated as something pertaining to a person, something which is meant to serve a person, something which has value, and therefore it has a din of tchum. It seems from the Gemara that otherwise it wouldn't get tchum at all. Tchum is something which relates to usage area of a person. But something which is not meant for usage, something not meant for to serve somebody, it doesn't have the concept of tchum. In fact, Rabbi Yehuda Kessler tells us that even a chayvetz of hefker acquires its own shvisa ben hashmashos, apparently because any item is attributed to a person. It's meant to serve somebody. It has value. It has inherent value because it's aimed to serve somebody, to connect to a baal. Okay, so having said that, any time an isser falls into heter, even if it's hefker, you can't say it has no value. It doesn't relate to an owner. It does have inherent value and can't be batal. Maybe isser could be batal, but value can't, according to your analogy. So this was a kasha back to Abaye. Abaye was the one who tells us that, look, mammon could be batal if it has no claim. Ingredients given by Leah to Rachel, where she's not claiming it back today, can be batal. Because bittul is dependent upon claims. If you're claiming it, there's an active claim, it can't be batal. But otherwise, it can be batal. Rav Safra came back and says, what do you mean? How can every isser be batal beheter? Elamai, you'll tell me, because we're speaking about hefker. There's no claim on it. It doesn't have value. What do you mean? But even hefker has value. Even hefker is treated as though it's owned by somebody, as we find in the case of chefze hefker kind of shvis. Now, that being true, so how can any isser be batal beheter? How can an avail be batal b'shchuta? Oh, so you must say like this. As Tosfos explains, you must say that these are two different topics. When we're discussing isser v'heter, nevela and shchuta, monetary value, claims, ownership is irrelevant. We're speaking about the isser v'heter element of this item. It's asur b'achila, it's mutar b'achila, that's all we care about. So whether it's owned, unowned, hefker, not hefker, it's always going to be batal. As opposed to the concept of tchumen, which, as Tosfos explains for us, is an ownership-related concept. One's possessions are bound by his boundary, are bound by his territory. His tchum applies itself to his items. Oh, it's not just a standalone isser like an avela, which is totally unrelated to ownership. Here, tchumen is an ownership-related concept. It's rooted in balas, and that can't be batal. Just because Leah gave her some ingredients doesn't mean she's relinquishing rights and claims to those ingredients. It's Leah's property, which were in her possession during Ben Hashmashis, and assumed her boundary, assumed her territory. You can't just disenfranchise her from her territory, from her ingredients. No. So that explains our Mishnah. Okay, so back to square one. So after this whole discussion, we now understand the Mishnah. Rachel borrowed some ingredients from Leah, which were in Leah's possession during Ben Hashmashis. This loaf of bread, which is really a joint entity, containing ingredients from both parties, is bound by both tchum. Ownership can't be bought. But Abaye wasn't left hanging. He responded. Ahumaleh, he responds like this. Still, I believe it should be bought. You know why? Although tchumen is rooted in ownership, but it is isser. Let's focus on the isser aspect, on the boundary limitation, on the tchum restriction. Let's focus on that on its own. That's isser. Let's ignore the fact that it's rooted in ownership. It manifests itself in isser v'heter, and that can be batal, irrelevant of ownership or claims. Amalei Abai responds, Mika madamas isur l'mamayna. How could you compare isser to mammon? Isur a batal. If it's an isser related concept, that could be batal. Isser is batal and heter. Her flour is heter. The water and salt is isser, and that's batal. It assumes the new tchum of the flour, of the rest of the dough. We focus on the isser aspect, on the tchum restriction. Ignore the fact that it's rooted in ownership. It manifests itself in isser, and that can be batal. Like any other isser is batal beheter, irrelevant of ownership. Mammon lay batal. I understand that mammon can't be batal. I understand. If Reuven's chitim fall into Shimon's chitim, it's not batal. That's an ownership discussion. That's not batal. But here by tchumen, I understand it's rooted in balas and ownership, but it expresses itself in isser, in restriction regarding tchumen, that could be batal. Oh, so back to the kash. She borrowed some ingredients from Leah to make her dough. This dough is bound by both tchumen, Rachel and Leah. What do you mean? Leah's ingredients should be batal into Rachel's bread and should assume Rachel's tchum. Rachel should no longer be restricted by Leah's boundary, because it's isra. So it seems that this was the focal point of the whole conversation, the whole sugya. Tchumen, is it isra or is it heter? It expresses itself in limitations and restrictions, but it's rooted in ownership. The tchum of one's possessions are bound by his boundary, his tchum. So it's an ownership factor here. So Abaye held, No, let's ignore the ownership aspect. Let's focus on the Isser, and that could be batal. Oh, so what's pshat in the Mishnah? The time of might. Indeed, so why is Rachel bound by Leah's boundaries? Says, well, you're right. Al Pidin, it should be batal, and Rachel could take the loaf wherever she wants. So why not? Abaye Omar Gzeira Shematas Isha B'Shutfus. Although in this case, certainly the minor ingredients are batal. But perhaps if we allow this loaf to be taken wherever, next time she might actually make a Isa B'Shutfus. They might partner in this loaf, and the flour and everything involved, in which case it's a 50-50 partnership, and of course in this case it's not batal. So concerned about that case. Rava Amar, I'll tell you why. Tavlin l'tama avidi. When we have something significant, such as seasoning, which give the whole dish its flavor, that can't be batal. It's too significant to be batal. Tavlin, seasoning in a dish. And as Jesus explains, the same thing regarding salt in the dough, or water, which is a main ingredient in making dough. That can't be batal. That's a pivotal part of this concoction here. Tam l'tama avidi. It's meant to add flavor of a tam batal, and tam can't be batal. So typically, perhaps you would say a minor ingredient is batal in the broader entity, but not when it's something so important as flavoring, as water in a dough. Rav Ashi Amar, he has another pshat. Why can't the minor ingredients be batal in the dough? Keep in mind, this tchum restriction is limited to today. It's something which can be mutter tomorrow. Midrabban, we say, don't take a chance. Why have it through bittul, which is like a suffix, right? You don't know where the isser is. You're going to have it and take a chance? No. If something can have heter after a while, wait patiently. Otherwise, it appears like you're taking yisurim lightly, taking chances. And even if it's mixed into 1,000, I feel be'elef like bottle. And therefore, Rav Ashi explains, salt and water mixed into my loaf of bread, since that isser, that restriction, is a davar sheish lamatirin, wait until after Yom Tov and take it wherever you want, or have it today over here. There's an option of heter, therefore bittul doesn't apply. So according to Tanakama, water, salt is not batal. Rabbi Yehuda Kessler, he says, when it comes to water, you have to reckon with the owner of the water. It's batal because it's absorbed in the dough. It's non-existent. Maim in. This only applies to water, melech, but not to salt. Apparently, according to Rabbi Yehuda, salt is different than water. It doesn't dissolve. It doesn't get overtaken by the other ingredients. And its tchum has to be respected. What do you mean, Vatanya? We have a Beitzah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Maim melech betelin. Water and salt are batal. Beitzah, Beitzah, whether in a dough, whether in a dish being cooked. Like Kasha, the answer is, depends what type of salt. How about melech stoimus? Melech stoimus was a finely ground salt which dissolves into the rest of the dough or the dish. So then it's batal. How about melech is teruknis? The Mishnah which says that melech stands alone is speaking about coarser type of salt, mined salt, in which case it remains intact and it's not batal to the rest. Vatani, but we had a Beitzah which says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Maim u'melach, betel and be'issa. Water and salt are batal to a dough, ve'im betel be'kedera, but not batal to food being cooked in a pot. Because there's some soup in there, there's some liquid material in the kedera, in which case the water is still intact and not batal. Whereas in the Mishnah we learn that water mixed into a dish is also batal. Like Kasha, the answer is it depends what type of a soup you're cooking. Haba ava, if it's a thicker consistency, in which case the water is no longer visible, it's absorbed into the soup, then it's batal. Haba raka, if it's a more liquidy material, in which case the water is still there and intact, it's not going to be batal. So in conclusion, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if it's finely ground salt, it's always batal, non-existent. If it's coarse salt, it remains intact and has to be reckoned with. When it's water, if it's a thicker mixture, it's batal. If it's a more liquidy mixture, then you have to reckon with it. Okay, so what do we learn today? If one borrows a kli from Erev Yom Tov, even if he only took delivery on Yom Tov, it assumes his tchum. If he borrowed only on Yom Tov, even though he's a regular borrower, it assumes the tchum of the owner. What about those ingredients? Why aren't they batal to the broader entity, this dough, this bread being baked by the borrower? We have 3 terutzim. Exera that next time she might actually make a partnership, an equal partnership, in which case it won't be batal. Second pshat is, these items, these ingredients are items of significance that add flavor, that make the dough, and they can't be batal. According to Rav Ashi, it's a davar sheish l'matir. We learned that according to Rabbi Yehuda, sometimes water and salt are batal if they're rendered obsolete and non-existent. Kultiv to you and much, much hatzlacha.